I have some recommendations for fantasy books that have romance only as a subplot, not the main point of the book. These recommendations do not fall in the subcategory of fantasy known as romantasy. Romantasy's been really popular right now. It's basically a romance story set in a fantasy world, but sometimes you don't feel like reading a romance. Maybe you just want to read a good fantasy and would like some nice romance included, because it is part of life. These recommendations will be based on books I have read in the last year or two, so as I remake these videos every couple of years, I'll have new suggestions based on what I've read, and I'm going to start with Brandon Sanderson. Now, Sanderson is not actually well known for his romance writing. Oftentimes, the romance in a Sanderson book can feel a little awkward, a little cringy. I don't think it's his strong point, but both of these from the recent year of Sanderson have really nice romance elements without being the main plot point. Tress of the Emerald Sea was the first of his secret novels that we got last year. The idea is like The Princess Bride, but we follow the girl who goes to find the guy who was lost at sea. So the story starts with kind of a romance trope, but the main bulk of the story is following Tress as she searches for her lost love. Her aim is to go rescue him. So even though romance is like the starting idea of the story, it's mostly an adventure story following Tress, and then the romance is in there and it's part of it and it's part of her motivation, but it's not the only thing you're getting when you read this story. And the nice thing about both of these is that they have really weird and interesting world building. If you don't know anything about these, they're both part of Sanderson's Cosmere. They both have interesting magic. This one, even though it's a seafaring story, the seas are not water. They're spores that are very reactive to water. So there's a high element of danger going on here. Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is even less romance-oriented than Tress of the Emerald Sea, but the two main characters spend more time together in this one. But as the two characters spend time together, it doesn't feel like they're building a romance. They're forced into each other's company. They have to work together. They have to learn to rely on each other, and their relationship just kind of naturally develops. I wasn't even sure if a romance was going to develop between the two of them or not, because that's not the main thing that the book is about. There's been some weird body switching, there's nightmares trying to invade the city, and then there's two separate worlds, and in the other world where there's not nightmares, there's some spiritual problems happening. And it feels like such two separate worlds that they're in, and as they're trading bodies and trading life experiences, they have to learn a lot about each other and how they're going to solve their problem. I don't know that I would recommend any other Sanderson if you're looking for a good romance subplot. Maybe Mistborn. I might almost say Mistborn Era 2 rather than Mistborn Era 1. Maybe that's just because the characters who fall in love in Mistborn Era 2 are a little older, so it speaks to me more now at the age I am, but those are my Sanderson recommendations. Next, John Gwyn, The Faithful and the Fallen. These are not romance books. That's not why they were written. These are as close to grimdark as I want to get. I would not consider these to be grimdark. They're like barely on the cusp. There are a lot of grim and dark things that happen, and so any amount of romance that also happens is like a bright spot in a dark world. And there's a few different ones. There's a couple of kind of romantic threads for a couple of the younger characters, and those are kind of what you would expect from teenagers. Very awkward. They don't really know what to do or how to interact. For me, the romance that I loved was so unexpected, and it was so unnecessary. The romance that was introduced is two characters that you would never expect, especially once they meet and start interacting. And you don't even get it right away. It's not until, I don't think it even happens until book 3 so you're waiting a while, but it's one of those that just, it felt like John Gwyn was not intending for these two characters to fall in love, but since they came together, it felt like just a natural, here's what would happen if these characters were together. And that's the kind of romance subplot that I like. I don't like when two characters are written purposefully to get together. It doesn't feel natural. And in the real world, you can believe in soulmates, I guess, but that doesn't mean you're just gonna meet somebody meant for you and it's gonna work out because somebody said so. You never know. And I love the way that those two characters in this series were able to find each other and find some happiness in a dark world. As far as the main plot, it's a chosen one trope. There's the equivalent to angels and demons. The demons want to gain control of the land. The chosen one has to try to fight them off and bring good to the land instead of evil. There's giants, there's prophecies, there's false prophecies. There's a lot of fighting and a lot of death. So if that's the kind of thing you like, and oh hey, there's also some romance, there you go. All right, next. Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies has been out at this point for about a year, and the second book, Emily Wilde's Map of the Other Lands, has just come out. These, out of all my suggestions, are probably the closest to being romantasy, but I would not put them in that category because the romance element is stronger here than in my other suggestions, but it's still not the main point of the books. Emily Wilde is a dryadologist, aka a fairy studier. She's a scholar and she's out to study fairies. And she has a colleague, Wendell Bamblebee, who wants to come and join her studies for some reason. So the main point of the books is studying the fairies, getting to know the natives in the places that they go to study the fairies. They get to know those people, they build relationships. There's some danger. Emily is very knowledgeable with fairies, but sometimes she still needs Wendell's help. She doesn't like that she needs his help, but she can recognize that she needs it. And over the course of the first book, there's just a really nice colleague to friend, and then from friend to ... Nothing felt forced. These are very like cozy fantasy feel. Both of them together are about the same size as any one of the other books I recommended. Just an easy, happy read with a little higher proportion of romance than the other ones. Robin Hobb. Okay, Robin Hobb, I would never suggest as, oh, you're looking for a romance book. No. The thing I love about Hobb's books, as far as the romance anyway, is how realistic it is. So I'll talk a little bit about the Farseer trilogy and the Liv Ship Traitors trilogy. The Farseer trilogy is the first trilogy in the longer series, The Realm of the Elderlings, mainly following Fitz. Fitz starts as a young boy in the first book, Assassin's Apprentice, and over the books grows into teenager and then young man. So the first one, pretty much no romance at all. By the second one, he is a teenager, and when I say the romance is realistic, Fitz is a teenage boy. He's in love, but also in lust. And so the feelings of physical attraction, being attracted to the girl as a person, are all kind of wrapped up in each other. His love is kind of selfish, and it gets in the way of their potential romance. And then by the third book, the best romance is completely unexpected. After reading the first two, it's between two characters you would not think. I unfortunately knew it was coming because I had seen a Reddit comment that spoiled it for me. It might have been nice to be surprised by the two characters that kind of find each other. And then the way that romance and love is handled between the different age groups of people is nice and is realistic. These are not happy, feel-good books. There's not a huge fantasy, The main fantasy element is the magic in the form of being able to connect to animals and talk to animals, and then like mental communication, kind of medieval time period. They're good books, but kind of depressing at the same time. So another one that I'll say, don't go into it for the romance, but when it happens, it's a nice little subplot. Feels like a normal part of the world and a normal part of their lives. And then when we get to Liv Ship Traitors, this is the second trilogy after the Farseer trilogy in the Realm of the Elderlings. And this one, differing from the Farseer trilogy, mostly following Fitz, this one follows several different characters across age and gender, and Hobb is so good at writing all of those. And the romance is very realistic for the point that different characters are in their lives. There's a couple of teenagers. One of them starts out super self-centered. She only cares if boys like her to increase her status and how she feels about herself. That's how she starts anyway. Some romance between the young adult characters, a little more serious. They realize that they have to think about their future and what it might mean for them if they were to get together. The slightly older couple that's already married, they have a lot of issues that they have to work through. And then the older couple, they've been together for a long lifetime, and they kind of have to look back at what they had together and do they have regrets. And I don't know, I really like the look at how people in different stages of life have different types of relationships. None of the romance is any of the main plot of the book, but it's probably a stronger thing than in the Farseer trilogy. Okay, last recommendation. This is also my oldest one, and I will preface this by saying that I have not read these since I have started this booktube channel, so I'm going off of kind of a hazy memory. That's the Magician series by Raymond E. Feist, and I believe I'm mostly thinking of these first two, which are usually actually one book just called Magician. I have it in two, Magician Apprentice and Magician Master. These can kind of be read as their own story. You don't even have to finish the series unless you really like it and want to. This series is very classic fantasy. We have the kind of medieval style world. There's magicians. You have the young orphan who goes on a journey and has to learn how to do magic. There's elves, dwarves. There's different levels of epicness. Close to home, wide universe. And there's a couple of different romance threads going through the story, but the main one I'm thinking of is one that at first you're not sure if it's even going to happen or not. You're not sure if you want it to happen or not. And then as that romance is starting to happen, you're kind of like, I don't know if this is what we want. I don't know if these characters are right for each other. And then the male character in the romance has to go through this big life-changing thing that if he can just get past it and overcome it, then the romance could be more positive. And so you feel like you really want to root for him as a person so that the romance can get better. And so I feel like it has you a lot more invested because it's not just the romance. It's not about whether they get together in the end. It's about whether they can actually be good for each other and make each other's lives better or make each other's lives worse. I'm hoping that this is a reread for me this year, if I can squeeze it in and make time for it. It's been a long time, and I remember loving these books. I remember crying over these books. That's what you want to hear, right? So those are my suggestions. 5 books, that was more than 5 books, 5 authors to try if you're looking for a good fantasy with some romance woven in. I hope you try some of them and enjoy them. Happy reading.